and it was honoured. Gross hunger took on more hands every month, erecting here and everywhere his vast, unnecessary workshops. Europe grew anxious about her health. Combines tottered, credits froze, and business shivered in a banker's winter while we were kissing. Today, no longer occupied like that, I give the children at the open swimming pool, lithe in their first and little beauty, a closer look. Follow the cramped clerk crooked at his desk, the guide in shorts pursuing flowers in their careers. A digit of the crowd would like to know them better, whom the shops and trams are full of. The little men and their mothers, not plain, but dreadfully ugly. Deaf to the Welsh wind now, I hear arising from lantern gardens sloping to the river, where saxophones are moaning for a comforter, from Gaumont theatres where fancy plays on hunger to produce the noble robber, ideal of boys, and from cathedrals, luxury liners laden with souls, holding to the east their hulls of stone, the high, thin, rare, continuous worship of the self-absorbed.
Auden was trying to rearrange England, or rather to rearrange the way in which he himself and others thought and felt about England. He was showing up rifts in something which people had wanted to imagine as seamless, a concept of Englishness which involved, amongst other things, the cult of village cricket. I've played a bit of village cricket in this part of the world myself in days when this bag was a good deal newer. For generations around here, schoolboys were taught to play by the rules and to keep a straight bat.
But village cricket was nothing like the present-day professional game as we see it here on the Worcester County Cricket Ground. For the Georgian poets and other lovers of rural England, village cricket expressed, or was meant to express, a sort of pseudo-feudalism. The blacksmith and the labourer played under the parson and the squire in the Georgian village of the heart, which was located in southern England. Meanwhile, cricket in the industrial north was played in fiercely competitive leagues, which by the 1930s were ready to hire black West Indian professional players. But the southern game was supposed to be a bucolic affair, played on the village green under the shadow of the Anglican Church. The church, of course, was a centre of Englishness and of English culture. Now the church and the memorial to the dead of the Great War stood together in centres of towns and villages. The war had been traumatic for many English people. Nostalgia for a better England characterised much music of the period, Elgar's, for instance.
And this corresponds to something you find in the English poetry that was most widely read in the 1920s, the poetry of A. Houseman, for instance, or that of the younger writers in the so-called Georgian school, several of whom had associations with this place, Dimmock, in Gloucestershire. Edward Thomas, the most gifted of the school, in fact, made the decision in his mid-30s to start writing poetry here in Dimmock. And he was a writer who impressed the young Auden enormously. But the Georgians in general were characterized by nostalgia for a vanished or vanishing rural past, as for instance in Edmund Blunden's poem, Forefathers.
Here they went with smock and crook, toiled in the sun, lolled in the shade. Here they muddied out the brook, and here their hatchet cleared the glade. Harvest supper woke their wit, huntsman's moon their wooings lit. From this church they led their brides, from this church themselves were led, shoulder high. On these waysides sat to take their beer and bread. Names are gone. What men they were, these their cottages declare.
Auden completely rejected the nostalgic and pastoral view of England. He was fascinated by mines and quarries and slag heaps and other evidences of recent human industrial activity, such as abounded in the Black Country on the line from Birmingham to Wolverhampton.
Clearer than Scarfell Pike, my heart has stamped on the view from Birmingham to Wolverhampton. Long, long ago, when I was only 4, going towards my grandmother, the line passed through a coal field. From the corridor, I watched it pass with envy, thought, how fine, oh, how I wish that situation mine. Tram lines and slag heaps, pieces of machinery. That was, and still is, my ideal scenery.
For Auden, this ideal scenery was not nostalgic. This was scenery that was still working. We mustn't imagine that Auden regarded industrial sites as heritage, as we tend to do now. But not many of Auden's fellow countrymen would have gone along with his preference for industrial scenes. Then, as now, people were attracted to places which evoked a violent past romantically, or typified the rural past. In the industrial West Midlands, it was very easy to escape into the nearby Shakespeare country.
Old castles like this one here, Kenilworth, where the Earl of Leicester is alleged to have murdered his wife, were great weekend tourist attractions. We're wrong to think about the 30s in England as if they were just a time of gloom and mass unemployment. For many people, particularly in this thriving Midland industrial heartland, there was better housing, they had greater comfort and increased leisure opportunities.
Bus and train companies encouraged people to get out of town. They commissioned enticing adverts from highly regarded artists. Car production in Britain was booming, and more families could afford motor cars, and car owners could explore England with ease and freedom. For many, the countryside was no longer a place of work. It now provided relaxation and spectacle. The Shell Petrol Company employed the best artists to boost its image as a corporation concerned, most paradoxically, about the countryside. There was a paradox because the petrol-driven vehicles which took people into the depths of rural England were, of course, destroying the peace of this rural England. Trippers in buses like ramblers and hikers and cyclists still sought out unspoilt country scenes, and if they were lucky, in some parts they could still see great shire horses at work. Such nostalgia for a vanishing rural heritage was fed by the Shell guidebooks to the English counties. In the 1930s, the general editor of this series was a friend of Auden and a fellow poet, John Betjeman. Betjeman feared that old England, graciously urban or peacefully rural, was vanishing under a suburban sprawl of housing which often imitated in a rather bogus way medieval and Tudor architecture.
Come, friendly bombs, and fall on Slough. It isn't fit for humans now. There isn't grass to graze a cow. Swarm over death. Mess up the mess they call a town. A house for 97 down, and once a week a half a crown for 20 years. But spare the bald young clerks who add the profits of the stinking cad. It's not their fault that they are mad. They've tasted hell.
This isn't Slough, we're in Birmingham, not far in fact from where W.H. Auden grew up in Solihull. But this area is entirely characteristic of the new housing estates which mushroomed in Britain between the wars.
Housing estates and urban developments blotched and patched and scabbed what had been attractive English countryside. Auden wouldn't have disagreed with Betjeman's anti-suburban sentiments, but some of his own poetry makes it sound as if he would happily have seen the bombing of rural England as well. He was innately suspicious of the squirearchical values attached to the countryside. What he wanted was new styles in human relationships, new styles of architecture, a change of heart, as he put it in one poem. And as a homosexual, he was consciously an outsider in English society. His poetry of the 30s sets against the repressions built into English values images of friendships linking individuals across national borders. In a sonnet written in 1934, Auden rejects English rurality, the English village of the heart, as sham, and comes out in favour of openness to new, human relationships.
To settle in this village of the heart, my darling, can you bear it? True, the hall with its yews and famous dovecot is still there, just as in childhood, but the grand old couple who loved us all so equally are dead. And now it is a licensed house for tourists, none too particular. One of the new trunk roads passes the very door already, and the thin cafes spring up overnight. The sham ornamentation, the strident swimming pool, the identical and towny smartness. Will you really see us home, and not depend for comfort on the chance, the shy encounter with the irresponsible beauty of the stranger? Or can you see precisely in our gaucheness the neighbor's strongest wish to serve and love?
The homosexual world had an innate tendency towards democracy, as men in different social strata recognized a common need. But other 30s writers, products of the public schools and Oxbridge, influenced by Marxist ideas, felt a mixture of sympathy, guilt, and curiosity when confronted by the northern working class, by Lancashire mill workers. In the spirit almost of explorers questing into savage regions, some of them actually went north to live among the natives and record the bizarre practices and ways of life there. Such explorers brought back images of England which were very different from old castles, pretty villages, and great shire horses ploughing. The documentary movement in writing, photography, painting, and film was creating a new vision of England, incorporating industry and working-class life. In 1935, Auden left the prep school, where he had been teaching, and joined the General Post Office Film Unit, well known for its documentary work. John Grierson inspired and led it. Basil Wright, one of Grierson's chief lieutenants, produced the unit's most famous film, along with Harry Watt. Half a century later, travelling with his former cameraman, Harry Watt recalled the unit's approach to filmmaking.
You must remember in the GPO film unit, as you know, we weren't long-haired people going around saying, oh, I think I might make a film about something. We were taken into Grierson's office and stood at attention, and he called you Watt. He didn't call you Harry. He said, Watt, you're going to make a film about train. Anstey and Elton and Watt. You know, it was like that, like the bloody army.
Night mail followed the progress of the mail train from London to Scotland.
People, very seldom, people who know about films realize that that whole section was scripted and shot before the commentary was put on it. You see, the commentary is very important on it. It made it famous, the Auden commentary and the Britain music. But it was all shot beforehand and edited beforehand to bring his stuff to Basil Wright and myself. And we'd say, no, Auden, it doesn't fit, I'm sorry. And he would say, all right, I'll do it again. And we'd throw into a wastepaper basket classic, wonderful pages of Auden poetry.
Despite working to this difficult remit, Auden was still able in his commentary to make a thoroughly Auden-esque point. His poems in general emphasized human relationships, the need in whatever landscape for lonely people to relate to each other. And in this particular case, lonely, unfriendly bombs fell on Britain a few years later. Elements of this new vision were used by writers and filmmakers who were now working as government propagandists on behalf of national unity in wartime. But Auden, who'd inspired many of them, wasn't there. He'd already emigrated to the United States in 1939.